A long time ago, on a comics page far, far away.
Welcome to Panel Up, your monthly pop culture panel. I'm John Campbell.
And I am Mike Ergoni.
Back again for a new month and a new year! That's right, it's our first Panel Up episode of 2024.
Do we have flying cars yet, John? I keep checking every year.
Yeah. Hello, Ford? How are those flying cars coming?
I was promised things that could fold out of briefcases. That's all I'm saying.
We are what, 5 years now past when Blade Runner takes place?
We're 20 years past when the Jetsons take place.
Jesus. Good Lord, man. If I can't walk on a treadmill outside of my high-rise apartment, what am I even doing here?
What are we even doing here?
Well, Gergoni, it's a new year. We've got new stuff to talk about. We changed things up a little bit, but I just want to get, just so that our fans will not be disappointed who are waiting for us to talk about this. We're going to be talking about a Marvel thing because I don't think we remembered that it was coming out at this time, so that's why this changed. But I would be remiss if I did not let our fans hear just a little taste of Mike Ergoni's thoughts on Monarch: Legacy of Monsters.
It's really good.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. That's your opinion. Yeah.
No, I mean, look. It gave me at least one giant monster fight. Yeah. I thought the dual roles of the Russells was a masterstroke. I thought it had its weak points. I thought it had its strong points. I don't think by no means is it a perfect show. And I don't think the show we're talking about today is a perfect show either. But I think Monarch: Legacy of Monsters is really a yet another piece in the crown of Godzilla material that we're getting within this 12-month span here.
You are living in the best timeline as a fan of this stuff, no question about that.
I mean, look, I'm really hoping we hit a triple on this one later in 2024 with Kong x Godzilla, The New Empire. We'll see. I've got high hopes, though.
Yeah. No surprise, less hot on it than you are, as I have been in general for the Monster verse. Though I liked it more than pretty much any of the movies other than Skull Island, which I'm a big fan of.
Sure.
But I agree about the Russells are far and away the high point of it. Yeah. I think both Russells were amazing. Their storyline was great. Really, my biggest issue is I did not come to love almost any of the other characters. The sort of core group of young people. While I think they're all good actors, I just never was and I kept waiting for that to happen. The whole season, I was like, I'm not into it. Well, give it time. And then by the end of the season, I was like, I still just couldn't embrace them.
The stuff in the past was a lot stronger than the stuff in the present.
Oh, 100% agreed. Except for Kurt Russell's presence, because he's just magnetic.
Sure.
And yeah. And so when he has some good stuff. And like I said, I don't blame any of the actors who I've seen at least the two female leads be really good in other stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't think the other guy is a bad actor by any stretch of the imagination. I just don't. I think they're and you can. I've talked extensively to another Godzilla super fan, our pal Brennan Jones, who had sort of and I think he kind of hit the nail on the head. They read a little bit more stock, and they kind of don't. They never broke a little bit out of cool hacker girl and
Yeah, and disaster lesbian. Look, that's what she was playing it as.
Well, and I would say that's not a new issue I have with this franchise. Is oftentimes, and so that's why the Russell stuff stood out in that was really effective, and the whole relationship with the woman from the past, all that stuff.
I guess.
Ender's Home, all that stuff was ooh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good character work for kaiju storytelling.
And my biggest issue with it is that the present day characters, outside of their hunt for their father, which of course is their main motivating factor, right?
That's fine.
especially rounding into Act 3 of that show, it really didn't give them a firm connection to Monarch, the organization. So it made their association with them later in the show tenuous and like strained at best.
And like, I think Monarch is such a cool idea, and I mean, I was with it for a while, but yeah, as the episodes went on, I don't think any of it's bad, but like I said, I was just going like, oh man, the longer this is going and the more I'm still not connecting to these sort of core trio of characters, that made it never bad, and I never hated watching it by any stretch of imagination. And it's beautiful. I mean, we should say the production value is incredible. They did not keep out on this, and that I have immense respect for. And yeah, all the monster stuff was great. It looked great. The thing that also both helped the franchise as a whole, but hurt my enjoyment of this, is just how great Godzilla -1 was.
Yeah. Godzilla -1 is incredible.
Godzilla -1 is such a great movie, and then it's also a great Godzilla movie. But it's like, it's just a great piece of filmmaking, really. And that's a movie I recommend. I don't care if you have no interest in Godzilla. Like, that is worth seeing. It is I really think that is a true, like, a mainstream approachable movie that has Godzilla in it. It's so good.
It's just a fantastic movie about survivor's guilt, right?
Yeah.
And Godzilla being a metaphor for the destruction war can cause and how someone feels when they alone are the survivor of that destruction.
And that's returning to how Godzilla was originally created, which was as a metaphor of Japan reeling from being nuked, right? I mean, that was the whole thing. And so it really does take it back to that original movie, which I do love, because that original movie, it's incredible to me. Like, as a franchise, Godzilla is so interesting because that original movie is such a great film. Like, it's an actual classic piece of filmmaking that spawned a very campy franchise. But like, there's the cinephiles are all just like, well, you gotta Godzilla is just one of the best like 1950s science fiction movies by far.
Yeah,
that's up there with Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Day the Earth Stood Still. Like, it's right in that same camp. And so it's so interesting how fast, because I was like, it's so crazy that like immediately they turned to camp.
Second movie is Monster Mash.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Right around the corner. Yeah. And like the fact that they go to Godzilla versus Kong in like movie 3.
Yeah, it's nuts. It is one of the wildest things. And, you know, once again, mileage may vary. You have a great love for that stuff. I have a minor love for that stuff. Like, I mean, maybe not even love, but like, I can enjoy
an appreciation,
particularly the older ones. You know, I can enjoy a Mothra fight on sort of a camp level. But I think Monarch is definitely good. I wish it was great, but it's good, and I think that's, you know, like I said, I certainly enjoyed it more than we've talked about. I really have not been mostly a fan of the Legendary stuff, and I will say all the Godzilla or the Kong X Godzilla stuff, I'm just not very interested. As much as I love Dan Stevens, who's in it, but also I already know that character will not be well defined.
And look, I can acknowledge the weaknesses of that franchise while at the same time, like, screaming my head off when Godzilla and King Ghidorah fight each other in Boston.
I have no ill will towards it by any means, and I hope you enjoy it and the fans enjoy it. It's a thing. When we did the Godzilla versus Kong review on the show, a couple years ago, whenever that came out, and it was sort of just like, I think I was just sort of at a loss for like, I don't know what you want me to say. Like, I recognize this is objectively well done. I just don't have it. It's just not my thing.
Yeah. Whereas I come at it with just like, my toys are fighting. I love it.
That's it, exactly. And there are plenty of things where it's like, that's the case for me and not you and others. And
you have RoboCop. I have Godzilla.
Yeah, man. Oh, we need more RoboCop. When am I going to get do you want to talk about franchises that both give me RoboCop versus Terminator? Make that movie happen.
Yeah,
that would be my Godzilla versus Kong. All right, so that's our brief thoughts.
Monarch is really good. I really enjoyed it. I think it's great in terms of the monster movie canon stuff. I thoroughly loved it.
My stance is, I think it's better than I thought it was going to be. So let's do that. Yeah, I think it was well done. I will say, not like begging for a second season over here, but
And I am.
Yeah, of course.
Because I'm like, what are those rascals over at Apex Cybernetics up to?
Right. And I'm like, oh, no, Kurt Russell.
Look, there's nothing saying he's dead in that show.
Well, this is true. And there's a lot about how much of a check they're willing to write to him, right?
Fair enough.
But let's talk about what we're mainly here to talk about, which I do think a lot of the reason we switched on this also was because that conversation was probably as much back and forth as we were going to have about Monarch. I started to go like, I don't have strong opinions.
Right. And when this show dropped, it hit like a fucking atom bomb with the two of us.
Yeah. And you and I were just texting back and forth about it. And then finally I did just go, this should just be what the show is, right?
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but it's true.
We're going to talk about Marvel Studios' Echo, a show that it's an interesting case of, and I think something that they've definitely been more focused on post Endgame on introducing audiences to characters that they may not know, that aren't the name brand Marvel characters, and certainly something Disney Plus has opened them up for. And now this is the first in this new line they're calling Marvel Spotlight, which is definitely meant to be, from what I gathered, all the press releases, meant to be approachable for people who aren't MCU completists. Our friend and a friend of the show, Michael Listman, was talking about, like, I love the idea of these Marvel Spotlights because he's somebody who enjoys individual things but doesn't really care about like this to lead to this Avengers movie. And he's going like, oh, these sound great.
Yeah, and obviously we've had little bits of that before. They weren't under this umbrella necessarily.
Yeah,
but I would argue things like Moon Knight and Werewolf by Night and like even WandaVision to a certain extent.
I mean, a little bit. That's more connected, obviously, because you're coming out of the Avengers stuff. But yeah, it also seems to take on kind of the Max line of they tend to be a little bit more mature. I think retroactively now we would call, especially because of this, call all the Netflix stuff Marvel Spotlight, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, look, they directly connect those in the form of a large white man called the Kingpin in this show.
I mean, that's the big thing about this was, especially in the later sort of marketing for this. And from what I gather, from what Vincent D'Onofrio said, this really has to do with the switch of showrunners over on the Daredevil show. Is now definitively this is in the canon of those, and those are now part of the MCU timeline. Because it was always sort of this nebulous thing where it's like, I don't know, we're going to kind of take or leave it. Is that the exact same Wilson Fisk as the one that now it's like, it is.
Yeah.
And all that happened. And especially, it hasn't been fully confirmed, but it's pretty well known that they're going to bring back Foggy and Karen as well in Daredevil. In fact, as of the recording of this, right now, they have started shooting Daredevil Born Again today.
Daredevil Born Again resurgence.
But that's the thing. Yeah, it's so interesting. I've seen people be like, "Oh God, new showrunners, whatever." And then I love that Vincent D'Onofrio's like, "Guys, you should be happy about this. We looked at a thing, felt it wasn't working, and then changed it." Like, why is that? Like, oh shit. You're like, no, I want a company that is willing to go, you know what? We've put money into this, but it's not as good as it could be. And we are willing to go back. And Marvel has kind of always been like that.
To the point where, and this is maybe a larger issue with the company, or could be, is that they build in time for reshoots and like post-production changes. So that if they're not happy with a way, there's like built-in space to let them alter the course of things. And that came
from I just read, which I highly recommend, the MCU book that just came out a couple months ago by Joanna Robinson. It's great, and it really gives you a look into the creative process over at Marvel. And that came out of when they shot the first Iron Man movie and screened it. They realized the third act just wasn't working. and it needed to be, and so they it was very costly because they went back and got, you know what, this is our first movie out of the gate, we're going to get this right. And so based on that experience is why they then built that in, going like, we just need to be ready to do that.
Right, but somehow along the way, and obviously negative voices on the internet gonna negative voice on the internet, and there's nothing we can do to stop that. And we'll talk about that with this show in particular, I'm sure. But
yeah, I mean, my attitude is always just like, those guys have to be mad about something, so you should just expect it.
But the expectation that a movie that is tinkered with and reshot after the fact is inherently flawed because of that is
right.
like a percolating opinion that has never made a ton of sense to me, other than like, I feel like these multi-million-dollar movies should go into production with some of this stuff ironed out. Like, how do you not see that something is working on the script? And I know that sometimes stuff that works on the page doesn't work on the screen.
Right. Or yeah, stuff that everybody's agreed on. And then, I mean, a big thing is Marvel is also really committed to test screenings. They really get in front of an audience. And so things that even you as a company are going, this looks good, this feels good, and then you get in front of an audience and you go, something's not clicking here. And sometimes the thing about the Marvel reshoots is they can take on any number of things. Sometimes they're changing the entire third act. Sometimes they're just going, you know, if we just get a couple more lines from this character or just shoot a couple more close-ups here, that will make this impact more. It's not always a massive thing. I think that's the other thing too, is people, the other thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about is this was always done, it's just now it's being reported. It used to just happen and nobody knew it.
Right. Like once upon a time, Lord Miller would be fired off of Solo and no one would ever hear about it, and we would just hear that Ron Howard made a Star Wars movie.
Like Tim Burton's Batman had an entirely different third act going into production, and literally mid-shooting, the whole thing in the end at the church tower was added. But originally, Batman was on a horse, and they were chasing people through a park, and you're like, yeah. And so it's like, yeah, but just nobody talked about that. That movie just came out fully formed when it came out in '89. And now it would be like, Batman production in trouble, you know, like...
yeah.
So, and I also love this thing, and I promise we'll get to Echo.
Poor horse out of work.
Yeah. Michael Keaton and Horace had big disagreements. Yeah. The thing about it too is everyone, and I guess we're guilty of that. Although I like to think we try to be informed about it, but like everybody becomes a fucking expert on film production too when they talk about this stuff, which drives me insane, right? Where it's like all of a sudden everybody goes, "Well, they're based on my understanding of the film industry." It's like, shut up.
Well, look, John, all I know is two things. Movies starring women don't do well in the box office, and you can never make a movie with the word Mars in the title. Those are just the two things I know.
You can't. This is just fundamentally the case.
I'm speaking hyperbolically for those who don't understand, because there's this gestalt hive mind that forms around certain ideas because of how, like, the film industry works. They will cling on to the lessons of things that work, even if those lessons are not indicative of larger trends as a whole.
There's so much money involved, so they're all so highly risk averse that they're doing anything to try to guarantee success. And so literally, I mean, I've heard stories where they bring in people and they've gone, we've run the math on this algorithm, and we can already predict that your movie will make this much money, even though the script hasn't even been written. But it's like, based on the genre, the actor you have attached, it will probably make this much money. You know, it's like, that's crazy. Because you're trying to take something that's totally subjective and turn it into actual, like, quantifiable information. And you just don't know. You just don't know. Like, because then there's stuff that hits and you're like, that thing was the biggest movie in the world? What?
A movie about survivor's guilt, giant radioactive lizards, and is subtitled in Japanese has consistently done numbers for the last 2 months.
Right, and that goes again. I mean, and then when that happens, then it's like, what do we do with that information? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then this other movie that we put everything into that we guaranteed, well, that didn't work. What?
Yeah, Jason Momoa, wet and shirtless, didn't do as well. What are we even doing here?
Actually, weirdly, as I'm sure you followed some of that, Aquaman has been chugging along and making a surprising amount of money.
Yeah. It's never stopped making money yet.
That's the thing about it, is it's like it opened, everybody's like, oof, but it's kind of just consistently chugged along. I have no dog in that fight, but I just think it's kind of like, oh, look at that. I guess maybe people do. Maybe there are people who do like that.
The little Aquaman that could.
Yeah, I mean, it is weird to think of a giant $200 million movie as like, oh, look at that little movie making its money. But it is just like that movie was, and once again, I haven't even seen it, so I don't know. But like, just the idea that everybody was just ready to shit on that movie. There's a part of me that's kind of like, well, good for you, Aquaman. That like because we
for the underdog.
This was very much the case with Echo, though, too. Getting us back to our main topic, like people had already prescribed. Oh boy, this one's not gonna go. Like months before it even came out.
Well, because we talked about the Marvel Spotlight being able to introduce characters who are a little off the beaten path, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting when you talk about that with Marvel specifically, because even like within the last 5 years, if you were to list any of the characters who were on a given Avengers team that in the comic books, I would say half of them are off the beaten path because they're not a Hulk, a Thor, a Captain's America,
well,
or an Iron Man.
This is the thing, right? Like at a certain point, Marvel has done all of the marquee characters, right? Like kind of the people that are left, unless you're making like another Thor movie. But like if you're introducing new stuff, yeah, you're going to start getting more obscure, aside from, of course, waiting for the debut of the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, right? But
when you say obscure, I mean, that's such on a sliding scale where Marvel is concerned.
Yeah, I'm talking very broadly speaking.
Sure. Before the MCU, I would argue that Iron Man was an obscure character, or the Guardians of the Galaxy definitely were obscure characters.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah, I mean, so many. Yeah, it is wild. Like, yeah, like you bring up Captain America, Spider-Man, Hulk, Thor, and then Fantastic Four and the X-Men are probably as much as people know. Like, if just before the MCU, broad strokes, if people were to name Marvel characters.
And even X-Men, like, it's Wolverine and then other characters.
Well, that's the thing. People know the X-Men are a team of superheroes and Wolverine and maybe Cyclops. I think people know Laser Eyes, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, maybe Beast.
Yeah, I mean, like people. There was at least here's what was it. There was at least an image when someone said X-Men. People had some lineup of characters, and probably maybe not even, but like the blue and yellow uniforms, maybe like that sort of thing. That X, that much like the Spider or the Superman S or whatever, that X in a circle was the thing where people go, oh, X-Men.
Yeah, no,
for sure. Same thing with the Four. Even if people probably couldn't name, they're like, that's the Fantastic Four. Now, could everybody name the Human Torch, Invisible Woman, Thing, Mr. Fantastic? Probably not. But they might be able to say
Stretchy Guy, Rock Guy, Invisible Lady, and Flame Guy.
Yeah, that's a thing. Once again, so it is crazy. But like, as you start disseminating down the list, Echo is like a side character from Daredevil who's pretty well known, but definitely like the next tier beyond total mainstream knowledge, probably, right? Like, I think that's where Iron Man was too. When you talk about the levels of obscurity, it's like, all right, there's the ones everyone knows, and then there's probably that what would be B tier to, once again, mass mainstream. Not to people like us, because we know, like, Daredevil is always one of the most prestige books at Marvel.
But in my head, when I heard the character Echo, my thought for the longest time as a comic books like reader, and I'm not a huge Daredevil guy, I always followed it like when I'd hear runs are particularly good, I'd hop on for a little bit and then hop off. But
meanwhile, you're talking to a guy who literally has a painting of him behind him. Because
Echo to me has always been like, oh, we've got Elektra at home.
Sure, I can see that from just the outset. Yeah, from the outside,
It's just like badass lady assassin who is associated with Daredevil, and like just based on only the character silhouette, and is like got the handprint thing as the iconography, but I associate that with Uruk-hai from Lord of the Rings more than I do any Marvel character. And her power set, at least in the comic books, was always just like, yeah, but we've got Taskmaster for that.
I think that's a big reason, because someone we both know is maybe upset, at least initially, that they changed the power set from the page. But I think that the number one, what they do in the show, I love. I think it's very smart. and two, yeah, maybe there is a reason why Miss Marvel doesn't stretch in the, I mean, I kind of get, and I understand there's a lot of comic fans who go, the audience can't handle that. I'm like, maybe not. I don't know. It's sort of a thing where you go like, yeah, there is a Taskmaster, so making Echo a different thing.
Well, and my argument would be like, maybe we haven't seen a comic book accurate version of Taskmaster yet, so do you really want the mirror fighter to originate with Echo and not have like an actual Tasky show up in like Spider-Man or something?
Yeah. I mean, yes, because we have, and boy, oh boy, did we hear the statements about that. Jesus Christ.
Look, I think Black Widow as a movie has its ups and its downs. I overall enjoy it. But Taskmaster as the bad guy of that movie left a lot to be desired for me because I like the comic book version of Taskmaster.
The tech-based Taskmaster makes sense, right? I mean, in the world of that. We'll see. We'll get more of that Taskmaster as she's going to be part of the Thunderbolts.
Yeah, and who knows? Could be cool. But I really like what they've done with the character of Echo in this show in making her a original character, leaning on the strengths of the actress and the culture that she comes from, whether it be the culture of just like existing as a deaf person or her indigenous background as well.
I mean, this is something that definitely, as Echo has been developed in the comics, some of this stuff has definitely come into it more. She's always been an indigenous character. She was created by David Mack during the second run, the second run of the Marvel Knights book, or I should say the second arc of it, after Kevin Smith kicked off with the Guardian Devil series. Then when David Mack took over and he created Echo in that run. So she goes back a little ways, but she's, late 90s, early 2000s character. And she's always had this indigenous background, but I would say that, like a lot of stuff in comics, that has been greatly expanded upon as more writers have taken over that. And there was actually just a miniseries out, surprise, right around the time that this show was being made, a Daredevil and Echo miniseries.
Synergy.
It definitely leans a lot more into the stuff we're seeing from this show with her connections to her ancestors and stuff like this. Not the exact same level of importance, but definitely like bringing more of that into it, which makes sense.
Well, in the same way that they've sort of retconned Miss Marvel into being a mutant as well in the comics to sort of align with MCU stuff. And that's been happening all over the books forever.
I mean the Guardians is one of the biggest, probably the biggest example, right? Where it's like they pretty much got turned into their movie counterparts. And you know what? Nobody really, because the Guardians were a hard thing to pin down prior to that. Like, right? I mean, we've talked about this. The Guardians have a weird history in comics anyway.
The Peter Quill you read in the Annihilation Saga is not the Peter Quill you're used to from the James Gunn movies. Not at all.
Nor is he really the Peter Quill when he first showed up in the 70s and he was sort of a Flash Gordon knockoff either. Like those characters pretty pretty consistently it really was James Gunn and Nicole Perlman who solidified a lot of their personalities and interactions with each other in a way that even as comic book fans, you're going, oh yeah, that actually makes a lot more sense. There's a cohesion here now.
Well, and Howard Stark is the same way. I feel like we've seen a lot of characters fit the mold of their MCU counterparts because that's what people are growing to expect. In terms of just like, well, I go to the Iron Man movies and expect a certain tone with my Tony Stark. So like he became less Howard Hughes and became RDJ.
Right. And I think as a comic book fan, I think Marvel has done a pretty good job of doing that without like breaking anything to me. You know what I mean? I think for the most part, they've handled it pretty well in terms of bringing in what's worked about the movies without making it feel like they're totally bending over to be the movies.
Yeah, the only exception to that is like the whole Miss Marvel mutant thing was so ham-fisted, I feel like. And the fact that like she died in a Spider-Man book, even though she had no real association with Peter Parker Spider-Man. And like it was really like just sudden at the tail end of the Krakoan era of stuff that's kind of wrapping up now with the X-Men stuff, and like I don't know, it could have been handled better. I think
that maybe could have been handled better. The only thing I'll say about that is like her being an Inhuman though was also
true
thing based on the movies. She's always been a casualty of weird multimedia shit, right? Like, because
That's absolutely fair.
yeah, there was that. Yeah, so it's just like, it's so sad because we both are such massive fans of that character, and she always is just being pushed around based on the needs of the conglomerate that is Marvel Entertainment.
Right.
And
Disney doesn't have the right to the mutants, so make her an Inhuman.
oh God, that and people can go back into our archives if you're one of our patrons. Hey, go and be one of our patrons. And you can listen to me just during that era be so pissed off when they were trying to push the mutants. That was such a funny time. They talk about this once again. I'm gonna keep bringing up that MCU book. But it was just so funny that they canceled Fantastic Four and then they tried to downplay X-Men and it just didn't go because the X-Men is way too beloved. And of course the Fantastic Four thing also pissed people off. But there wasn't the same like, yeah, you just can't make people stop reading X-Men. It's just not going to happen. And the Inhumans, have there's been good Inhumans runs, but it's like they just don't have what the X-Men. They can't be the replacement.
Unless you go back in time and have Chris Claremont write 15 years worth of Inhumans that solidifies in people's childhoods, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, too endeared, man. It's just like, I always talk about like I'm a Marvel fan, but almost more so maybe I'm an X-Men fan. Like X-Men is just such its own beloved franchise. Anyway, all of that is to get back to Echo, which is really my sweet spot though at Marvel. Aside from the X-Men, I live for the street level Marvel. All my favorite characters are the dark, violent ones. So,
Well, and I like a street level Marvel that is a little bit more on the whimsical side in terms of just like, okay, there are street level implications to these grander Marvel bullshit that's going on, like Inhumans and mutants and Celestials and weird powers being infused into the earth in our distant past and recurring now.
I mean, both of us are big Moon Knight fans because I think he is the perfect hybrid of a magic-based street-level character. He's a character whose total mystical background plays out in being a street-level vigilante.
Absolutely. And I think they were trying to strike a similar tone with this show. And so I went into this show fully expecting it to be like, okay, street level, kingpin, gangster, violence stuff. The character we saw of Echo in the Hawkeye show. Again, a show you and I are huge fans of.
Love Hawkeye. One of the best things they've made at Disney Plus, no question.
I agree. I watch it every Christmas. And
it's regular Christmas viewing. I talk to a lot of Marvel fans who say that now.
It lined up perfectly because I was able to watch that over Christmas, and then this show immediately dropped.
Right into the new year,
so it seems like they maybe timed that pretty well.
And right off the bat, the plan was always to spin her off. The second they introduced her in that, the plan was to give her own show.
But in that show, she is very much also like street level bad guy. Like, yeah, she's got enhanced abilities in terms of like she seems very strong. She's got her own like fighting style and capabilities. What with her she's got a prosthetic leg that she can use to great effect.
Which is one of the coolest things about the casting. Which we'll get to all this, but like Alaqua Cox. Who I think we both have massive praise for as this character, right? She's amazing.
I've never seen... I can think of maybe like 2 other instances of movies and TV shows that have given the level of depth to a deaf character who basically has no dialogue outside of... No spoken dialogue, I should say.
Right.
But what she's able to convey in terms of emotion and interiority in that character without actually having to say anything is astounding.
She is, I mean, it's amazing to see somebody not able to do one of the things we think of acting, which is to actually speak out loud with their voice, but to convey everything in just as captivating a performance. I am so drawn to her in every scene, right? Her face, just like, and the other thing is, I was thinking this watching this because this is probably the most I've ever seen sign language implied or used in any film I can think of, maybe other than oh shit, what was that movie that won Best Picture a couple years ago about the girl who's in the family of deaf? I can't remember what it was called now. I'm sorry. Somebody write in. It was really good though. But she was the one member of the family who wasn't deaf, and was about her. Really good movie. But I was thinking about sign
Coda.
language. Coda, really good. Children of deaf adults is what that means. That's why. The thing I was thinking is sign language is really cinematic. It's a visual medium, so the idea of people expressing themselves with their hands, like, was really compelling in this. I really was paying attention to that. Like, there's inherent acting in it, and so you get whatever is lost in not being able to really hear Echo's voice. Beyond, she sort of does this quiet sort, and she does it in real life too. And I don't know if this is common amongst a lot of deaf people, that there's a kind of a whispering of the words along with but like, there is such acting in that. The way she's gesturing, how she's choosing to do it, is all so calculated in a performance. It's a really good, and this is the first thing she's ever done. She had no acting background prior to playing Echo.
Well, and what is, I think, lost on a lot of people when it comes to sign language as a whole, and ASL in this particular instance, is that it's lost on folks that it is its own language, right? It can very easily be interpreted as just like, oh, you're saying the words you would say in English with a sign or a gesture in the same grammatical order and in the same like sequence of words that we process with our ears, and that's just not true, because
that's like any language. When you're translating, you can't go one-to-one between any of the two languages, right? It just doesn't work like that. And so it's very fascinating watching this show. Like I said, it's so compelling, and then the cool marvelly tech of the contact lens she gets, and it's doing the digital hands when Fisk is talking.
I was wondering when they were going to do something like that, because it felt like a shorthand that needed to happen.
But I also love the idea too, and they bring it up in the show, but it's so intrinsic to Fisk's character that this guy spent all this time raising this girl and never learned sign language.
Yeah.
That really speaks to the kind of person he is. Because you see everyone else who cares for this character has learned that.
I want to circle back to like how this show struck me though, right at the top though, because we talk about what draws us into this show.
Yeah.
And when this show starts with the Choctaw creation mythology as like the mythical origin story of this lineage of super people, I was just like, okay, I don't know what this show is anymore, and I'm immediately here for it.
Yeah, that was definitely that. And then it was like by the second episode when they started that, I'm like, oh, I see. So it's gonna be, each episode is gonna have this part, and then it all coalesces into actually being her power set. But it's like, okay, there's gonna be a one-to-one thing, and that is so cool and so much more than just paying lip service to representation, right? Like, it is intrinsic to the plot and the character. No other superhero is gonna have this power set because they're not tied to this culture. Only Echo can be this. And the idea that, yes, she is an echo of all of the ancestors.
One is the echoes of those ancestors that empower her.
And empower the other women around her, as we get in that final fight when her grandmother and does her cousin also gets, right? Powers.
Bonnie, yeah,
they all get powered up. Bonnie from Reservation Dogs, which, by the way, here's another thing that's great about this show. I was both heartened and saddened by this at the same moment. That I love all the actors in this, and I've seen them in so many other things, but that also means I'm like, right, because these are the only indigenous actors in Hollywood. That's why I see them in everything I watch that is about these cultures. And we are really in a golden age for representation of indigenous peoples in movies and television right now. There is so much good content coming out of it, whether it be Reservation Dogs or one of my other absolute favorite shows that's on right now is Dark Winds, which is about a police chief on a Native American reservation. So fucking good as detective dramas get. We had some of that in Longmire as well. All the Taylor Sheridan shows, the Yellowstone stuff, there's all kinds of tension in there that's really, and he works really hard to make sure that that culture is represented properly.
We saw it in a couple of movies recently. We've had like Prey, obviously, was a great example of that.
Prey, yeah.
And the other one, did you see Blood Quantum? Yeah, that zombie movie. That was really good.
Yeah, Blood Quantum's fucking great. And the main guy from Blood Quantum is in this.
Mm-hmm.
And Rutherford Falls, which was stupidly canceled by Peacock. They were totally wrong. But basically, most of the cast of that show is in this as well. And like I said, which is great that they're all in this, but it is also makes me go like, right, because that's if you were to make a show with this size of indigenous cast, it's like everyone in Hollywood who is something. It's so I will say though that my to me the most enjoyable of that kind of thing in terms of tracking back to other things I've loved is Graham Greene and Shantu Cardinal, who play her grandparents. They played a married couple in one of my favorite movies, Dances with Wolves. And they were great in that movie. So there was already a chemistry established because they are so wonderful in that movie together. And so their scenes just crackle with this chemistry from, 30 some years ago. They played a couple in something. And I was so heartened by that because I love that movie. As people always hear me talk about Costner. But that is a great movie, and they're wonderful in it, and they're wonderful here. Number one, I like Graham Greene. I just love. I just always love his presence in anything.
Yeah, he's always such like grandfatherly is maybe like too on the nose, right? But he's got this paternal warmth to him that he brings to so many roles. And
he has this weight or gravitas or kind of a wisdom without it feeling like, oh yes, the wise, there's a mirth there. There's a twinkle in his eye that's very and really, really works here and makes you see why he would be the person Echo would go to first when she returns to her home.
Yeah. And like this show is like endlessly filled with people like that, because I want to speak about how do you say his first name? Chaske Spencer.
I think that's right.
Who plays Henry Black Crow Lopez in this show, who is Echo's like cousin or uncle? I don't know. Big family.
Yeah, I mean it is that.
I think he's supposed to be her dad's brother.
Yeah, it is. It is an interesting thing that I feel like one of the things you really get about this show is this tight-knit culture that she comes from, and sort of this idea where you start to go like, well, are they all related, or are they all just sort of like everybody? There is this big familial feeling to the whole culture, right?
Well, and something you get in cultures that are so like family oriented is this idea of aunts and uncles who you call your aunts and uncles but have no actual blood relation to you, right? And like saying aunties or uncles or grandfather or grandma, it's like those are just the older people in your life that are constantly around. Whether or not they're actually related to you by blood, it doesn't matter, because the family is the group of people around you who are helping to bring up the next generation. And I can only speak to this from my own like Italian heritage background, where it's just like I have people I call uncle and aunt who are not related to me in any way, shape, or form, but are such a big part of my childhood and my upbringing, and they were always there around and like breaking bread on Sundays and pasta dinners and all that other stereotypical bullshit.
Yeah, but it's like Sopranos, right? Like, Sunday dinner.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is that feeling. It is something why I'm always drawn to these stories, because I never had that. I'm always kind of jealous of rich in culture in that way, because I'm a muddled mix of European white, just white all get out. But not one enough to be like an identity. And so I'm always kind of jealous of the people who can feel that towards, like, I don't really care about the like 23andMe stuff because I'm just like, I don't feel it. I don't feel any attachment to the ancestors. I don't really have long family tradition. Once again, I come from the Campbells. Well, shit, there's a ton of Campbells like it doesn't really, whatever. And yeah, so it's
you don't feel anything particularly yearning for the hills of Scotland, John?
no, because like even though that's our name and we have a lot of connections to that, I have just as much German blood. I actually have a lot of Icelandic. My mom
Sure.
but I'm like, but I don't have any connection there either. So it's like all, and then it's that weird thing where it's like I'm a little bit that, a little bit this, a little bit, and so I don't have that.
But if you grew up with like salted herring every single
Right.
week and
That's the
like
thing, yeah. It was never that. So it's it's which the pros of that are I'm also open to all this stuff because I don't feel closed off and I never so I've always been I've always been fascinated by that, and there's always kind of things like the tight knit cultures. Like whenever I see a lot of this stuff about Native American tribes and things like that, you go like, oh man, it'd be cool to have like a tribe like that.
well, and
And
that's
there's, of course,
where
cons to that as well.
sure, yes.
Yeah. God, I mean, also there's lots of stuff where it's like Jesus Christ.
Yeah, look, this is not the time and place to start talking about the psychopaths who are leaning into replacement theory.
Oh
But
boy, this show has gone over very well with that crowd, as you might imagine.
yeah, of course.
yeah.
But it speaks to this like man, my first thought was just to say cultural emptiness, and that feels really passive aggressive. But it's this idea of having something culturally that you share with the people around you, and it's
Right.
like it's why I get judgmental when somebody hands me a meatball and I go, "We'll see."
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. That there is something. There is a maybe ownership's the wrong word, but yeah, there is something in you. There's something a part of you. You're part of something larger than yourself, and
And
we have to look.
part-
I look for that more in broader things like films and comics and sort of the
Well-
shared language of the pop culture stuff.
And that's where a lot of this cultural like camaraderie in terms of like nerd culture, whatever you want to call that,
Right.
comes from, right? It's just like you have this whole generation that is growing up in this like milieu of cultures being presented to us via the internet. Like we have access to everything. So we, by that same token, because you have access to everything, it waters down any one thing that might be presented to you as like your heritage, right? So like even though I have this like strong Italian background and I have the Sunday dinners and the pastas and the Chianti bottles are wedged in my brain somewhere,
Right.
at the same time, I don't put out the checkered paper fucking tablecloth every Sunday and make myself a
Right.
pasta dinner. That's the thing I do with my family. I'm the next generation away.
Right.
So the idea of this character of Echo who has this heritage like literally speaking to her and reinforcing who she is such a powerful motif in this show.
Totally. And that the idea, like I said, that is central to it. It is literally her power comes from that connection, that bloodline. Is really, like I said, it's one of those things where it's like, it's kind of what we were talking about when things coming to the comics, we're like, God, that's richer than anything they've done in the comics, actually. In a lot of ways,
Yeah.
we've talked about this a lot. One of the things the MCU really benefits from is that they get to do the second draft of these characters, right? They get to look at everything that comes and they go, this works, this works, this works. What if we put this in with this and move this? So in some ways, there are aspects of this, and I'm going to come back to this because I always say this, and people it's to be a catchphrase on any podcast I'm on, which is the platonic ideal of these characters is often what I feel like the MCU versions of them are, because they are this, and this put together, done this, because comics, because they run forever, there's contradictions and there's ever changing things of these characters, and the MCU gets to look at all that's already been done and move what works and what doesn't, and then move stuff, put stuff together, add stuff on top of it, that it becomes these sort of ideals of these characters.
Because just to cover the basics, and you can speak to this maybe better than I can because of your familiarity with the Daredevil comics.
Mm-hmm.
In the comics, she does have like the basic same background of being like raised by Kingpin and being brought up into this world of crime and blaming characters who maybe don't deserve it for her familial woes.
Totally. Yeah, definitely.
And a central part of the character in the comics is that turn and her like coming around and shooting Kingpin in the face. Like that's all from the comics.
The idea of like the realization that Kingpin has been using that rage, and oh god, I mean, I don't even want to get into D'Onofrio just yet, but like that scene where he's just like, use that anger, do the, it's just like, I mean, it's almost Emperor from Star Wars kind of stuff, right? A little bit, right? Where it is just sort of like he's actually, this loving father is actually been forming her into this weapon.
Yeah, and
even if I think that Kingpin's such a complicated character that I don't even know that he perceives that he's fully doing that. I think he does think he loves Maya.
It's what makes D'Onofrio's Kingpin so engaging, right? And it's what was built into him through the first season of Netflix's Daredevil and really came to a head in the third season.
It's what the thing that I can now definitively say this because that's all canon. To me, the best MCU villain. He is so, I mean, in terms of maybe maybe I should say the most interesting. Because I mean, we get into like Thanos is more powerful, but similar. The reason Thanos is so interesting is for similar reasons. It is the complexity of these guys. Because I mean, I've even heard D'Onofrio go, "I'm street level Thanos." Is Wilson Fisk?
Sure, no, and that's always should be.
Yeah, that is the case where it's like, and this show, I've talked to a lot of people about this. It does feel like he's always been the perfect Wilson Fisk. But particularly in Echo, I feel like he is fully the comic book Kingpin in this.
Yeah, I mean, we get a little bit of everything in terms of his painter's brush of Kingpin, because we've seen so many different turns over the course of 3 seasons of Daredevil and then this. Obviously, we didn't get him a ton in season 2 of Daredevil, but
when he does show up, it has such impact, right? Like,
yeah,
and that's the same thing here. He is at the beginning of this thing, and then he disappears, and then when he comes back, it's like, oh, fuck. There's such weight to him. I love, because it's not even just in his performance. That scene where she's being arrested and the cops just clear for him, and then that one that doesn't, the guy's like, do you know who that is? I'm like, that's the Kingpin. The guy who can just walk everywhere, and everybody's like, yes, sir. It is. Yeah. He just commands. The air goes out of the room when Wilson Fisk walks in.
No, and that's absolutely what you want when Kingpin shows up, is everyone groveling, everyone at every level of power, and it's the heroes like Daredevil and Echo who are able to stand up to him. Like, it adds that much more weight to their conflict when he brings that much gravitas to any situation.
And, of course, where this sets up going, I can't wait to see him in the realm of politics and gaining more quote-unquote legitimate power is going to be so fascinating. Oh, Born Again can't get here soon enough. This just because we only get and believe me, I've already seen the people who are pissed that there's only 98 seconds of Daredevil in this. But
yeah,
that's good. And apparently there was, at one point, there was going to be more. And I do think the showrunners made the right call. Like, no, because the more you put him in there, the more he's going to distract. It's not called Daredevil. It's called Echo. And this is Echo's show. She's the main character. The whole thing is about her journey. Wilson Fisk is there as a supporting character to her journey. It's all about her relationship with him. And I do feel like Daredevil is so popular, so beloved, that you got to be careful how you throw that spice in, right?
Well, because you immediately lose the track of, if we call this after the main character and then suddenly it's a team up show, you've lost the sauce. Whereas Falcon and Winter Soldier, right up front, it's Falcon and Winter Soldier. We know what we're getting here.
And dude, if we want to get after this and after Born Again, a Daredevil and Echo show, I'm here for that, man. That would be awesome. I would love a team up show with them. Or I do hope she shows up in Born Again, and I bet she will.
but especially when you're establishing ostensibly a new character, because as much as she is the character from the comic, this is also a character who is very much springing whole cloth out of the MCU and spinning out of, let's be honest, the casting of Alaqua Cox as Maya Lopez.
That actually brings me back to this thing earlier, because you mentioned the prosthetic leg, and that was the thing where that's not from the comic. That's just, this woman would be perfect with this part, and she has that, and then that opens doors. And the way they use that, particularly in the fight scenes, is so cool. The way she can like brace herself against a wall because she doesn't have a knee and just has this straight rod of a lower part of her leg, and she can leap off of stuff and hit people with the leg. You know, the way she leans into that is like having more impact when she kicks. She kicks with that leg. There's just a lot of the way that Daredevil goes after that leg with his baton, like
you just hear the clank.
Yeah, like it's so cool. And by the way, look, okay, film is a subjective medium, all right? However, the people who are trying to bag on the fight scenes in this, they're just wrong. Like, you can talk about without enjoying them, but objectively, these are great fight scenes. Like I said, you have to like make shit up to make them bad fight scenes.
I like all the fight scenes. I will say, I feel like the last one is like a little lackluster in my opinion, when all the different like echoes of her past show up.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, because the two standouts are the Daredevil single shot. It's like a 5-minute single shot,
and
fight
the
scene.
roller
and the roller. Yeah,
the roller ring. Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Absolutely rule, and I would put them up against any of the stuff from Daredevil. It is of that caliber.
They showed a titanic level of willpower and restraint not doing a hallway fight in this show.
They did. I mean, the drug stash house fight is as close as you get to that, where it's the visual language of Daredevil. It's closer to that prison, the season 3 prison fight with Daredevil. It's closer to that, where he's moving through sections of that prison, which rules. And and if you think I'm not spending way too much of my time just watching compilations of fight scenes from Daredevil, you don't even know me. The amount of times I've watched that last Daredevil Kingpin fight from season 3 in Kingpin's apartment, God, that just rules.
The last Bullseye Daredevil fight in that season as well is just it's peak for me. I really hope that version of Bullseye comes back.
God damn it, Wilson Bethel is that actor, and he is so good. I have no doubt he will be. It seems pretty, because there's already rumblings about Kristen Ritter shooting stuff for. I have no doubt that realm is open to the. I mean, that we know that door is open. So now it just is, can we get that person right? We'll use it. It's there.
Ultimately, what I want is, okay, election of the century, Luke Cage versus Wilson Fisk for the mayoral race of New York.
I love in the comics when they're like, we've run all the numbers and all the facts. Luke Cage is obviously the guy that has to run for mayor. Like, if we're just looking at all the Avengers and stuff like that, because obviously Tony Stark's like, I should do it, and they're like, yeah, no, I don't know, that's the right. So no, I hope we get to see that. Of that group, the person I want to see back most is Mike Coulter, because very similar to Alaqua Cox as Echo. It's just like that guy just became Luke Cage. Like really, it was like, oh, there he is. That's him from the comics.
And say what you will about the Netflix shows, I think there's a general consensus that as they went on, while maybe not like a dip in like consistent show by show quality, but like overall there was a little bit of a fall off.
There definitely was. And I think a lot of that had to do with they existed in this nebulous space, right? They couldn't be the MCU. They weren't given the same resources also. And so I think they were a little aimless. Jessica Jones, I think most of all. But definitely Luke. I think Daredevil's the only one that's good. All 3 seasons are amazing. I think Iron Fist did tick up, and I know everybody goes, "Oh, well, that's not much to do." But like, I think there wasn't an attempt to do something better in the second season, and I think both seasons of Luke Cage are pretty good. I think season 1 is better, but I think season 2 is still pretty solid. And I'm bummed we never got season 3, because season 2 ended with him basically being like, I'm going to be the Kingpin.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I'm like, God damn that we didn't get to see that is a huge bummer.
And then, of course, Defenders is what it is.
There's a lot of great stuff in Defenders. I think
there's good stuff. I think overall it is like inherently flawed by some decisions they made about
and
how they go about it.
And I think that one, the most of them, really suffers from the nebulous nature of it. Like that needed to get really big in MCU in scale, and it feels like it just couldn't. I feel like Defenders is more disappointing than it is actively bad. I think people, once again, are always more hyperbolic, but it's like, I don't think there's anything bad in it, but I do think it's like, oh, I wish there was more of that, or I wish the ending felt larger in scope. I thought the Defenders together were really cool. Like they're it's a thing where it kind of fails on the big moments, but lands a lot of the smaller stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what convinced me that, like, we could even have a Power Man and Iron Fist in this configuration, because I think Mike Coulter and, what's his name?
Finn Jones. I think Finn Jones, say what you will, and I think a lot of the negativity towards him does come from the fact that they did not give him the proper structuring for his fight training. Huge fucking problem. I mean, they talk about, once again, in that MCU book, they're talking about, they were literally teaching him fight choreography, like, punch by punch, on the set as they were filming it, and you're like, that's just not how that should be. But I was gonna say, I think him and Coulter, he gets so much better in every scene with Coulter. I think that really brought out. So I would love to see a Power Man and Iron Fist show on Disney Plus. I think that would be, with those two actors, I think would be wonderful. That being said, I would rather see a Dodgers of the Dragon show.
Well, okay.
Because I think we can all agree that the Misty Knight and Colleen Wing of the Netflix shows were perfect.
Yes, 100% correct.
That casting, and I see Jessica Henwick pop up in a lot of stuff these days, so I'm like, Marvel, lock her in, because she's getting a lot of work, and you don't want her to be too busy to come back and play Colleen Wing, because, oh man.
She keeps popping up in stuff that, like, never quite succeeds enough for her to explode, but there's gonna be something, I feel like, because she's too good.
Yeah, and she's turning in stuff like her in Glass Onion, where it's like, that's not her thing, but she's great in it. Or there's this tiny little movie I just watched that people should check out if you want, like
Matrix Resurrections.
That's it. Which actually I am. You can go back and listen to our episode. I am a massive, massive defender of Matrix Resurrections. I loved Matrix Resurrections. It's called The Royal Hotel. It's with her and Julia Garner from Ozark, and it's a tiny little thriller set in Australia. It's them and Hugo Weaving, and I highly recommend people check it out. It's a real, what we used to call back in the day, a pot boiler, where it's all just slow burn tension. 90 minutes even with credits. Fucking great. All right, so back to this though. I think so. I think a lot of this was, in some ways, it has its own identity, but and I think one of the things I loved actually about this, I was watching going, I love that the trailers mostly included stuff from the first episode, so it did seem a little bit more like urban crime. They didn't lean into, once she goes back to, is it Oklahoma that she goes back to?
One of the Dakotas.
Or is it one of the Dakotas? I don't know. I'm confused on where she returns to, but the idea, it's Oklahoma.
Okay.
So they hit a lot of that. So they did, and I think obviously that's where some people go, oh, by the way, the term bait and switch should just be banned from criticism. I do think the idea, though, people saying there's not enough Daredevils of bait and switch is hilarious, because like they called the show Echo. I don't know what you were being misled on. The fact that they hit a lot of that stuff was really cool to me, because then I was like, oh, I didn't know this is where the show was going. And it's mostly, I've been describing this to people as like, is this what Marvel Spotlight's going to be? Because I'm cool with this if these are the indie dramas of Marvel. Because a lot of this, take out like the magic powers and stuff, and this feels like a Sundance drama about a girl who got messed up with crime, has to go back to her hometown and confront the issues of that. Like, that's one of the things I think that why this stands up to, I put this pretty high on a lot of the stuff they've made, particularly Disney Plus, but I think so much of Marvel succeeds because they're good character pieces, and this really works as that. It really worked. Like I was so invested in her and the people around her, and that's set up right from the start. The fact that this opens after you get the creation myth, which of course gets us into crazy, which is not only true to culture, but gets us into crazy, almost
mystical
Jack Kirby
powers. Yeah.
eternal stuff. But then we go right from that to this extremely grounded moment with her family and seeing the death of her mother and how she lost her leg, and just how devastating all that stuff is. And it so grounds you in this character. And then that we spend the first half of the first episode is basically stuff we've already seen, but from Echo's perspective, right? It's
we
a
basically get a recap of Hawkeye, but from Echo's point of view.
Yeah, which is really cool because Echo, of course, was a meaty supporting character, but was in the shadows of that show a lot. Was sort of
keep calling her Echo. They literally never call her Echo in the show. But that's a thing in the MCU.
Call her Maya, right? I mean that you get the scene about she is an Echo, right? That's the whole idea. Her power is an Echo. I'm gonna call her Echo. It's just gonna happen. So
that's the superhero name. Yeah, it's like calling Wanda the Scarlet Witch. It's just like, okay, they call her the Scarlet Witch once out of everything she's shown up in. But come on.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just, I mean, that's how I know her from the comics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'll say Daredevil instead of Matt Murdock too. It's just going to happen.
Sure.
But I'll say
John, he's the devils of hell. He's the devil of Hell's Kitchen.
They call him Daredevil in the show.
In this show and in She-Hulk. I think before that they'd maybe used the name.
They called him in the papers. Was the thing?
Yeah.
You would call him Daredevil, but yeah, most people called him the Devil of Hell's Kitchen. By the way, speaking of this from She-Hulk, I love that he's back in red, of course, here, as he should be. The yellow was so cool to see that they did it, but I got my fill in that. It's like that's fun that you got that, but get him back in red because that's what he belongs in. And he's just badass. But I love all this stuff I was saying about her. Being so tied to this community, but also being removed from it, and it is like I said, that's such a classic like indie movie thing of I'm going to return home and confront the trauma of that, or
not even confront the trauma of it, but like try to find the one place I remember feeling safe before everything went to shit. And
right. Because,
obviously, like that place has changed because I've changed, and how those two different like evolutions reflect on each other and how they can heal each other.
Community, and is now, having been through all this, is coming back, but of course is bringing through her return. We're seeing the reflection of that. I almost said the echo of it, but the reverberations of the stuff. Although we see in the show that Fisk already has his fingers in this community.
Yeah, man, Chaske Spencer as Henry Black Crow Lopez is probably my favorite part of the show as Maya's uncle.
He's great.
I think he's such a dynamic actor because he's one of the few actors who can like keep the full sign language and verbal speaking going. That's a fucking magic trick of acting.
It really is. It's incredible. And I actually think the scene between her grandmother and her when they're in the kitchen is another moment like that where it's really effective between the two. I would recommend a show he was just on Amazon called The English. That's a Western that he did with Emily Blunt, and they're the two main characters in it that he's also
cool.
And I see on his IMDb something that I'm bummed never came to be, which was the television adaptation of Jason Aaron's Scalped.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they were going to do that as a show, and he was one of the main actors in that, along with Lily Gladstone, who's now nominated for an Oscar for her lead role in Killers of the Flower Moon.
What channel was Scalped supposed to be on?
I think it was AMC.
Okay, it's like I've read that book. I don't know how you do that on a TV show.
Yeah, I think it was going to be. I want to say it was AMC, which makes sense because they would. I think they would have seen it in the realm of a Breaking Bad kind of tone. I love Scalped. Of course, I'm a huge fan of it. It's a super dark and violent crime thing.
Yeah,
but yeah. So yeah, she returns home, and yeah, as you're talking about. Henry Black Crow is a guy who's a criminal, but in this sense of like well, this is how it is, right? Like it's just sort of like I'm just trying to survive, which means working for Fisk, but I have no actual allegiance to him, right?
Yeah.
But it's just, and basically to her, so much of him in the early thing is like, please don't rock the boat, please don't fuck up this town. Like everything is. I know you're angry, but like, man, some of us are just trying to live, and the Kingpin just has his boot on our throat, and we're just trying to
his
live as
his
best we can.
trains and his stuff come through here, and
Yeah.
that's it. But it
Yeah.
also it speaks to this idea of the Kingpin's influence and power, right? It's like, okay, we always imagine Kingpin in New York, but even out here in Oklahoma, like Fisk shipping
Right.
is printed on the side of a train
His
station.
empire, sure, is based in New York, but its tendrils are everywhere, man.
Yeah.
Which is true to, I mean, most massive organized crime, And so, yeah, I do love that. And then, oh god, the fact that we get basically a train job in this was so cool. The
Yeah.
second episode is her having to jump on the train, and she's not stealing though; she's just blowing it up. And God, when that thing goes up, you're like,
What are your thoughts on Biscuits?
I think Biscuits is properly employed in this. I
Okay.
think
Cody Lightning playing the role of Cousin Biscuits.
Yeah, I think number one, we've all got a cousin Biscuits. He's a type. Also, gotta love that Cody Lightning is wearing a Lost Boys shirt in his IMDb profile photo. Makes me love him more. But
respect.
I think he is used just enough. I think he could have been more annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Are you not a Biscuits fan?
Look, the point of him is that he's a little annoying, right? He's that member of the family that everyone rolls their eyes and goes, "Oh yeah, Biscuits is here."
And that's what I
Oof.
mean. I think he is in the show the perfect amount.
Yeah, and like I like that he has a dog. That's fun.
And I like that it's like he's all right though. You know, he's not a bad guy, and it's just sort of like, don't you get Biscuits in trouble, Maya? And
Biscuits
the whole,
doesn't deserve that trouble.
the whole idea that they know that they're like, oh, we fucking know Biscuits will go with her. Very fun, and that he's selling his PlayStation to make money. You know, it's like
To fix his grandma's car, yeah.
Yeah, he's all right. He's the troubled cousin who's like, he's harmless. He's all right. He's just sort of a knucklehead, right? Like it's just sort of like
knucklehead's the perfect word for it.
that's it exactly. Where it's like he's probably been mixed up in shady stuff, but he's not doing the bulk of the bad part of it, and it's just like
Right. He played lookout once when they stole some beers out the back of the 7-Eleven.
Yeah. He's all right though. He's an okay guy. So I do enjoy that about Biscuits, and that he sort of becomes her de facto sidekick for some of this stuff. Because it's like, well, Biscuits can get the truck, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
I liked I think there isn't a weak link in this cast.
No,
I don't think there's
it like a lot of good TV shows that we look for in this stuff. Everybody feels fleshed out, even if they're not in it very much. Like Biscuits, for example. That Biscuits isn't in the show a ton, but he really has a character. And I think that's the case, particularly for Bonnie, because Bonnie is felt in a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of talk about her even when she's not in it. So there's always sort of this, Bonnie has such importance even in scenes she's not in. And the whole idea about like, were you gonna let Bonnie know you're back in town? Oh, I don't know about it, because like Bonnie is the opposite of Biscuits, and this like, well, Bonnie's the good one. Hey, Bonnie's the straight arrow here, all right? Bonnie is, you know, she's the best of us.
well, and she's the like bright reflection of Echo, right? She is the what if the good path was taken.
And that's kind of, I think, part of why Echo want to contact her, because it's like, well, now I'm gonna feel bad. When I'm with Bonnie, it's gonna force me to look at the bad choices I've made. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
even though she's my best friend and I love her, and she's not gonna put that on me, I'm gonna put that on myself just by being around her. And we do see that once she's in this, she does have Maya's back.
No, it's very heartwarming. Like you say, indie drama is like so on the nose for this, because yes, there's the grim crime element, but there's also this like recovery from trauma element that is seen so I think very specifically in any scene involving Maya's grandmother, right? And that there's this level of trauma that she is carrying about how her daughter died and how she feels like Maya's dad was responsible for all that, and how Maya bears the weight of those sins even if she doesn't deserve it.
Yeah.
That
Tantu
is
Cardinal, who plays her grandmother in this, is wonderful and has been wonderful for a long time on the criminally short-lived Stumptown. She was on, and she was also in Killers of the Flower Moon this year. She's amazing, and as it goes back to Dances with Wolves, and every scene with her, she just, and this is very much how she feels in Killers of the Flower Moon as well. She is just so, her heart is on her sleeve, right? Like she can't, in every scene, her feelings are so omnipresent. And another character who Maya is maybe want to immediately make contact with, because she knows, like so much of this show is the trauma of Maya. She's dealing with this trauma from the experiences in New York and the death of her father and the betrayal of her foster father, and this whole idea about but her being unwilling to really, even though she's gone back to her hometown, being like, I don't want to talk to Bonnie. I don't want to talk to my grandma. Because it's like, I know those are going to be hard conversations. So as strong a character she is, it's interesting to see where it's like, well, that's going to make me too vulnerable. And then, of course, when she, only by doing those things, can she actually come out the other end of this.
Right. Well, look, it turns out healing is all about communication and confronting problematic pieces of your past, right?
Ultimately, the point of the show, right? Ultimately, the theme of this, to kind of get to the end point of the show, is everybody is carrying this trauma, but everybody is also carrying the weight and power of their lineage. Yeah. And the way that ultimately saves Maya from becoming a villain. But I love the scene where she finally gets the sort of the power of empathy, right? Or whatever, the power to relieve one of one's trauma. She gets this healing ability, and she does that to Wilson Fisk. And I just watching, I'm going like, no, he can't, he can feel that. You can open that up from him, but he can't be saved.
Yeah.
And it's so good.
It's the hammer, right? Like, that's the metaphor, is Wilson Fisk isn't the wall that he stared at as a kid. He is the hammer that killed his father.
Yeah.
He isn't the white marred with cracks that like he sees and stares at in Daredevil. He is the bloody hammer that cracked the skull of the man who hit him.
That scene I love. In the first scene between them in the show, he talks about, I also lost my father, and then later in one of the later episodes, he's like, I didn't tell you the full story. And the fact that he has the hammer too, and he opens it up.
Yes, I know, nerds. It's not the same hammer as was within the Netflix shows. Get over it.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter, guys. It's once again, it's like forest through the trees, man. But that he's like, all right, here's your chance to destroy your pain the way I did. Kill me, which is, God, it speaks to how fucked up his like love for her is, right? But it's just like, if you really feel I think he knows, of course, that she won't do it, obviously, but...
Well, and that's the thing, right? It's like, okay, say Maya does grab the hammer and swing it at his skull. Yeah. You think his hand's not shooting up and grabbing her and tossing her out a window?
The gesture of love is to offer her that.
Yeah, that's the fucked up part.
Fucked up he is. Oh, God, this guy. He's just... There's no hope. You can never save Wilson Fisk. He is... pure evil, right? And of course he was made that way, but it doesn't matter. He has to be stopped, preferably by Daredevil.
I'd take Spider-Man too.
Hey man, if we get Daredevil, Spider-Man, and Echo, and throw the Punisher in there too, and they're fighting Kingpin at some point, you know what I want is, nobody wants the Kingpin to fight Spider-Man more than Vincent D'Onofrio. He's constantly tweeting about it. He's just like, let Marvel know you want to see me fight Spider-Man.
I want it so bad, Vincent. You and I are on the same page.
And it's you know who we all know. I think Kevin Feige does too. We all know who's stopping it.
Sony.
So yeah, the ultimate villain of the MCU. Sony.
Yeah, look, we'll see Madam Web in a couple of months, and we'll revel in that villainy. We're not covering that on the show, right?
No, but there will be a, and I'm promising this now because I've already got him to agree to it. Brendan Jones and I will do a punch up goes to the movies about it. We are going to go see it.
Sick bastard.
Yeah, we were at a movie the other day, and that came up, and I'm like, oh god, we're going to see that, right? He's like, oh yeah, of course. I think we got to record a show about it. He's like, yeah.
Can the episode just be like Brendan groaning for 45 minutes? Because I feel like that's gonna be you in the theater.
Yeah. And sometimes I as always, I love the guy, but he nitpicks. But I feel like neither one of us are gonna have a good time on that one. Even me, as open-hearted as I go into this stuff, I don't think I can back Madam Web. It's such a bad idea. We'll see how Sony's feeling at the end of this year after Madam Web and Kraven the Hunter come out.
And Venom 3, right?
And Venom 3, but that one will do well, I predict.
But it's just like it's weird that Sony has 3 Marvel movies coming out and Marvel Studios has 1.
4. You forget about the Spider-Verse.
Across the Spider-Verse, yeah.
Those do well for them, but those almost feel like outliers at this point. Like Venom is a thing unto itself. I guess as is the Spider-Verse movies. Those almost feel like their own franchise that happen to be that what they can't make is the shared universe work.
It feels like lumping Lego Batman in with other Batman movies, right? Even though, like, objectively it is a fun and good Batman movie, but I never think about it in that equation.
No, I would never say my favorite Batman movie is Lego Batman. As great a Batman movie as it is, it's like that's really not part of the conversation. To a certain extent, same with Mask of the Phantasm, because like that's always. In fact, our old pal Dan Scotty once got because he said, "What do you think is the best Batman?" I'm like, Mask of the Phantasm. He's like, "No, boo, cheating." Yeah, I get that, but I do think that. At the end of the day, that's what I like about this show is it is about we all carry some form of trauma. And what do you do with that? What do you let that become? What do you let and we see what I like, and especially I like that they include that scene between her and Hawkeye early on, because he did succumb to that. When he became
That's how he became Ronin,
Right, exactly. And so I love that the use of Hawkeye, the use of Daredevil in these little moments aren't just like an MCU character. They do reflect still Echo's journey. And same with Fisk.
It's something we've seen time and time again in Marvel Comics, right? And like, because you mention a character like Hawkeye, who was introduced as a bad guy and eventually was like turned to the side of good, and like Echo, introduced as a bad guy, turned to the side of good. Like, how many of our favorite characters are these like misled, sometimes villains who have like seen the light?
Black Widow. I mean, look at Black Widow. One of the ultimate examples of that. She was literally turned into a weapon. It's such a key component of the superhero genre, right? Like, if you're going to call superheroes a genre, one of the tropes of it is this fluctuation of good and evil and how power leads to one. And it's why I know some people get really upset when villains become heroes, but it never feels out of place for me. The idea that Harley Quinn has gone on this journey. Well, it's like, well, if you were to read, and of course it's very tough to do this with any comics character, but if you were to read her story as the life story of somebody, she's one of the most fascinating characters in comics because of that. Same with Venom, right? Like, I mean, same with a lot of the characters. And one can get upset about that, but I like that the characters aren't static and that redemption is often a big part. Look at how, I wouldn't say he's on the side of good by any stretch of the imagination, but look at how fucking complicated Magneto has become over the decades. I certainly always push back on when people call him a villain, though.
Well, because like a Harley Quinn, as much as like the comparison to Magneto and Harley Quinn feels like a wild side by side, but it is weirdly comparable in terms of their larger character arcs.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And I think it's something that was always present from moment one with the Punisher. And that is why I'm always fascinated by him. And I think he has done a disservice when he is reduced to grumpy guy with a gun who's really good at killing people, right? Like, that is so limited. And that is why I love when, I don't know if you've seen these comments from Bernthal, where he's just like, if we're going to bring him back, we're going to bring him back right, or I don't want to do it. Like
I respect the hell out of that.
He is such allegiance to that character, and that is something that MCU book also brings up. And this is the last time as we wrap up here. I swear this is the last time. But like that is something that all those actors are sort of given. Like Kevin Feige and the Marvel people at the top, and all the filmmakers have to keep this universe going. But each of those actors really has to vouch for their character. They have to make sure, is this being served? And a lot of them really take that on. It's like, no, the Punisher wouldn't do that, or whatever. It's like at a certain point, especially when you're going movie to movie and the directors and the writers are changing, Benedict Cumberbatch is the keeper of Doctor Strange, and now Alaqua Cox is the keeper of Echo, and they spend more time with these individual characters going movie to movie to movie to show to show to show than the individual writers that swap out, and except other than Feige, but he's got to be focused on the big picture. And I'm sure Paul Bettany, who's they're not going to do the Vision Quest show. I'm sure Paul Bettany is going to have a big hand in what is Vision doing? Is this a Vision thing?
Yeah, no, and I think what Echo is doing in terms of bringing us a character who has been shaped by their actor is also a interesting, and I don't know how important it'll be in the long term, but she is definitely, I think, the actor in the MCU who has made the biggest impact on the character she is playing.
100%. I mean, it in some ways you do kind of have to go back to Downey on Iron Man, right? Like it is sort of thing. It's just like they are these definitive things, and the character starts to bend around them. And we've seen this with a couple characters, but particularly I think those two feel the same, where it's just like there is no they're just fundamentally different as a result of that. Like whatever the game plan was, whatever they were in the comics is changed because of these actors' portrayals of them. And I think that's great.
Exciting.
That's the gift that the MCU can do. It's something they can do that the comics just aren't the same thing. So that's our discussion of Echo. Please, if you're watching us on YouTube, please comment below your thoughts on Echo and what you're thinking. And of course, make sure you're
even if you didn't like it, we were going to respect your opinion. I understand these shows aren't for everyone.
Yeah,
John and I just came to this show like expecting one thing, getting another, and I think that can be a little. I don't know. It is a little rocking the boat in terms of like, well, I just wanted a superhero punch 'em up, but opening yourselves up to what the superhero genre can be, and like,
I think
it's not even really a genre.
It's something that I really respect Marvel for, is that they are proving that all kinds of stories can exist within this universe, and that they are connected by the universe they're in, not the type of movies they are. And it's always the pushback we have whenever, because I was surprised at a couple of the mainstream, like big name outlets that have reviews. I saw several just be like, it's another Marvel show. And you're just like, is it though? You went like at that point where I'm going like, you're going in with that attitude, because you can say I didn't like it, but to just go more of this shit speaks to just anyone with powers then is going to be
very dismissive.
I don't like that. I just think that's like that's just not fair. You don't have to enjoy it, but just to write it off like that. So of course, make sure if you are watching us on YouTube that you like, comment, and subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. And if you're using us on any of the podcatching software, make sure you rate us on there, whatever 5 stars is the highest thing. And head over to our patrons page, patron.podbean.com/punchup for cool exclusive bonus content, as well as helping out the shows. I don't know
really appreciate it. Thank you.
I don't know what February is going to bring us, so I can't announce what the next panel up topic will be, because we're in sort of a weird time in pop culture. But we'll talk about.
You don't know what February is going to bring us, John?
What's that? What comes out?
It's the IMAX re-release of Dune.
Oh, how could I forget? So I don't know. We'll see what we end up talking about come February. But of course, we'll be back next week with more 1970s wackiness from the Star Wars universe. And we'll be back next month to talk about something that we'll figure out. But that's going to do it for this month's episode of Panel Up. I'm John Campbell.
And I will always be Mike Gargoni.
The next month, we're going to panel down.